Our main speaker today is Silverman. Herb is the founder and president emeritus of the Secular Coalition for America, founder of the Secular Humanists of Lowcountry in Charleston, South Carolina, and founder and former faculty advisor to the College of Charleston student Atheist/Humanist Alliance. He's also written for On Faith at the Washington Post, Huffington Post, The Humanist, and other magazines and blogs. After an 8-year legal battle, Herb won a unanimous decision in the South Carolina Supreme Court nullifying the state's religious test requirement to hold public office. So please welcome to the screen the candidate without a prayer, Herb Silverman.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint, so I'm going to turn that on now. Can you all see this?
Yes, this is good.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be speaking about my book, Candidate Without a Prayer. It's an autobiography that describes my journey from Orthodox Jew growing up in Philadelphia to apathetic atheist to accidental activist atheist when I moved to South Carolina, and now to what some might describe as an evangelical atheist. I'll begin with the X-rated part of my talk. I know I was a lot cuter then. Many years later, on a tour of Israel, I was barred from several holy sites because of my attire. But one church said I only needed to have my knees covered. So I pulled my shorts below my knees and said, is this all right? And to my surprise, it was. And that's just one example of how some religious people can mindlessly follow rules that make no sense. And now for the G-rated part of my talk. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, went to a high school with mostly Jews, and hardly ever saw or talked to Gentiles. But in 1961, when I was 19, I heard that a charismatic Christian speaker named Billy Graham was coming to Philadelphia. So I went to hear him, and like many others, I had a life-changing experience. After Billy Graham spoke, he encouraged people to come forward and be saved. I didn't even know what that meant, but out of curiosity, I came forward. Billy Graham mumbled a few words, and each of us who was saved was given a pastor to talk to. My pastor asked, "Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" And I said, "No." He then tried fire and brimstone, but that also failed. But when he found out that I was Jewish, he brought over a converted Jewish pastor to talk to me. When I learned that this pastor's parents were deceased, I asked him how he felt knowing that his loving parents were burning in hell. He told me they weren't. So I brought back Pastor 1 and watched Pastor 1 and Pastor 2 arguing about Pastor 2's dead parents. I realized for the first time how much fun it could be talking to religious people. And that was my life-changing experience. My first teaching job was at Clark University in Massachusetts, in Worcester. It was during the Vietnam War. In one protest, a number of us were arrested for blocking the draft board. I spent a brief time in jail where I shared a cell with one of my mathematics students. He asked me for math help, and we were let out of jail just about the time he finished his homework. So for me, going to jail was a lot like holding office hours. Unfortunately, our actions did not stop the war. But I did make one important civil rights contribution around that time. When a PhD student of mine passed her qualifying exams, I took her to a local Worcester bar to celebrate. But the bartender told me that the bar was for males only and that we would have to leave. The following day, I brought an African American woman to that same bar, and the bartender was obviously uncomfortable, looking like a racist, so they served us. On the third day, I brought back my female graduate student, and they served us. And from that day on, this Worcester bar admitted women. It felt good to promote civil rights by drinking. I moved to South Carolina in 1976 to teach at the College of Charleston. It was my first trip below the Mason-Dixon line and a bit of a culture shock for me, and I think for South Carolina as well. In my book, I describe my experiences with some of the racism and sexism I saw and how things are slowly changing. I'd like to engage with progressive religious folks who do good works, and I had a wonderful opportunity in 1988. I admire former President Jimmy Carter, so I spent a week in Atlanta working at Habitat for Humanity with Jimmy Carter. There's Jimmy, and there's Rosalind, his wife, and there I am right behind them. I didn't realize just how Christian Habitat for Humanity is. Its founder, Miller Fuller, right over here, led us in daily prayers to Jesus before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I suggested to Fuller that he could get more participants if he were inclusive, since all of us were there to build houses for people. Fuller told me he wasn't. He was there to build houses for Jesus, and he would stop if he thought that Jesus didn't care. I much prefer Jimmy Carter's viewpoint. We would have dinner nightly at different African American churches in Atlanta. One time I walked in with Jimmy Carter, and there was a standing ovation. So I whispered in Jimmy's ear, "I hope you don't mind. This happens to me wherever I go." After teaching at the College of Charleston for 14 years, I had gotten pretty used to living in South Carolina. But I underwent a major life change in 1990 when a colleague there pointed out that our South Carolina Constitution prohibited atheists from becoming governor. I knew that the U.S. Constitution barred religious tests for public office, so I went to the local ACLU there, where a lawyer told me that an atheist would need to mount a legal challenge by running for governor. And he said that the very best candidate would be me. Well, I looked around and didn't see much competition. So after giving it some thought, I agreed to be the candidate without a prayer. After filing for candidacy, I learned that atheist is a very provocative word, and not just in South Carolina. The Associated Press picked up the story, and the following day, I got a call from a very distressed woman in Philadelphia. I had to admit that the Philadelphia Inquirer was not the best way for my mother to find out that her only child was a candidate for governor and an atheist. I never expected all that publicity, so I thought I could spare my mother such heartache. She didn't so much mind my being an atheist. The problem for her was going public about it. She always wanted me to appear respectable, but that never quite happened. Meanwhile, Governor Campbell said that our South Carolina Constitution was fine as it was because our country was founded on godly principles. I was invited onto a number of radio talk shows where some of the callers would say something like, "As an atheist, I suppose you feel free to go out and rape and murder and do whatever you think you can get away with." My response to such callers would be, with an attitude like that, I hope that you continue to believe in a God. I soon realized that I didn't just want to change our state constitution, I also wanted to change some of the hearts and minds of my fellow South Carolinians. The media would usually introduce me as a so-called atheist or an admitted atheist. I would sometimes ask the host if he ever introduced a guest as a so-called Southern Baptist or an admitted Catholic. Republican Governor Campbell knew he would have an easy re-election victory, so he refused to debate the other candidates. But I participated in a number of three-way debates with candidates from the Democratic Party and the American Party. That's the old George Wallace Party. In a statewide debate on public television, my friends thought that I had won the debate, while I expect friends of the other candidates thought that they had won. But a year later, there was an objective way to determine the winner. Of the three participants in that debate, I was the only one who was not in jail. The American Party candidate was in jail for driving without a license and refusing to get one because it's none of the government's business. The Democratic Party candidate for more traditional reasons, tax evasion. During the campaign, I heard stereotypical comments that atheists are mean and angry protesters who do nothing but ridicule religion. I wanted to show that we do have a sense of humor. So here are some questions I was asked during my campaign and my answers to them. What would be the first thing you would do if you were elected governor? Demand a recount. What would make you believe in God? Perhaps if I won the election, it would take that kind of a miracle. What will happen to you when you die? I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to medical school, just like my Jewish mother always wanted me to do. I expect to use my body parts to their fullest when I'm alive, but I hope others will be able to make good use of them when I die. I did have my day in court, but the judge decided that my case was not ripe. In other words, he would only rule on the merits if I won the election. Well, to the surprise of no one, I lost. But I'm an optimistic kind of guy, and I always look for positives in this situation. The best for me personally was that I met Sharon, and Sharon became my one and only groupie during my campaign. We actually met in church. It was the Unitarian Church, the only church that invited me to speak during my campaign. When I lost the election, I blamed Sharon because she had become my campaign manager. Now, that sounds like something that Donald Trump would say, but he'd expect people to believe him. So with politics now in my blood, what to do next? I decided to fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a notary public, someone who stamps documents. Actually, I learned in 1991 that the South Carolina Constitution prohibited atheists from serving in any public office, and notary public would be the easiest one to challenge. So I filled out the form, crossed out "So help me God," and submitted my $25 application fee. But Governor Campbell rejected my application. When I asked why, he said it would be too burdensome to explain why all notary public applications were rejected. Well, in his deposition in 1994, we found that in that period of time, there had been 33,471 notary public applications, and that mine was the only one that was rejected. As far as I know, I'm the only one in the history of South Carolina to be rejected as a notary public. I then won my case in several lower courts, but the state kept appealing it up to the South Carolina Supreme Court. Finally, in 1997, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in my favor, nullifying the anti-atheist clause in the South Carolina Constitution. And yes, it felt very good. I went to the county clerk's office with Sharon to pick up my notary certificate. Sharon took pictures of the clerk handing me my license and of me holding it above my head in triumph. Now, I don't know what your definition of a loser is, but the others in the county clerk's office who knew nothing of my case had quite a chuckle, thinking that becoming a notary public was the high point of this guy's life. One of my students at the College of Charleston, who was unfamiliar with my case, saw my notary certificate prominently displayed in my office. And he asked me if I had to go to law school to become a notary public. I told him, no, it wasn't quite that simple. Law school would have taken only 3 years. It took me longer to get my notary certificate than my PhD in mathematics. My right to become a notary public should not have taken 8 years or happened the way it did, but it was well worth the wait. Throughout all my endeavors, Sharon had been a wonderful friend and partner. So after living in sin for 10 years, Sharon and I got married in our home on January 1st, 2000 at 12:01 a.m. Sharon wanted me to get dressed up for the wedding, so she got me a tuxedo t-shirt for the occasion. I had never told my mother about anyone I ever dated, but I figured it was about time. So I brought Sharon home to meet Mom. Even though Sharon isn't Jewish, my mother was relieved to learn that someone actually liked me. When we told an Orthodox aunt that I was getting married, this aunt had just one question: is she Jewish? When this aunt got the dreaded answer that Sharon Frate Pietro is not Jewish, she refused to even meet Sharon. When I told a liberal aunt that Sharon and I were both atheists, This aunt said, "Couldn't you marry a Jewish atheist?" During my run for governor, I got a considerable amount of hate mail, as you might expect. But I also heard from a surprising number of people who thought they were the only atheists in South Carolina. I got some of their names, and in 1994, I helped form a local group, the Secular Humanists of the Lowcountry, which has become a vibrant community with over 150 active members. Here's our organization's t-shirts, and the back of our shirts has my favorite pun. In 2009, our organization put up a billboard, "Don't believe in God, you are not alone." Since this was the first such billboard in South Carolina, Lori Goodstein from the New York Times came down to Charleston and wrote about it. Her article, "More Atheists Shouted from the Rooftops," was the second most popular piece in the New York Times that week. The takeaway from the article was, if it can happen in South Carolina, it can happen anywhere. I also learned about several national atheist and humanist organizations, and I joined them all because they were involved with issues I supported. But each was doing its own thing and ignoring other like-minded organizations. I wanted to show our strength in numbers and cooperate on issues that affect all secular Americans. So in 2002, I helped form the Secular Coalition for America, whose mission is to increase the visibility of and respect for non-theistic viewpoints and to protect and strengthen the secular character of our government. We formed as a political advocacy group to allow unlimited lobbying on behalf of secular Americans, finally giving an atheist a voice in our nation's capital. We went from all volunteers to a dedicated staff of 6. Not quite what the religious right has, but a reasonable start. We now have 19 national member organizations covering the full spectrum of atheists and humanists. We hope to expand to 50 active state secular coalitions. We're gradually gaining visibility and respect with members of Congress, including a Congressional Free Thought Caucus founded by Congress members Jamie Raskin of Maryland and Jared Huffman of California. There are now 13 active members in the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and we hope to increase our membership. The Secular Coalition can certainly use help from committed activists like many of you. So check our website, secular.org, volunteer at our Action Center, and consider supporting the Secular Coalition for America. I've taken part in many debates, and as president of the Secular Coalition, I was invited to participate in a debate at Oxford University in England. We were told to wear tuxedos, which I rented and wore for the one and only time in my life. The debate topic was, does American religion undermine American values? I began. You just heard Richard Lowry over here, editor of National Review, complain about how difficult it is for him to be a conservative in New York City. Now I'll tell you what it's like to be an atheist in South Carolina. I then told some of my stories, and I closed with, in this melting pot called America, we are one nation under the Constitution, or maybe under Canada. But we are not one nation under God. Given how the religious right opposes the teaching of evolution or any scientific or social view that conflicts with a literal interpretation of the Bible, we are really becoming one nation undereducated. Our side won the debate. I also enjoyed debates with ministers, which is often the first opportunity for Christians to hear an atheist point of view from an atheist rather than from their minister. One such debate was on, can we be moral without God? There were over 800 in the audience, mostly from the minister's megachurch. During the debate, we got to question each other. My favorite question for the minister was, how would you behave differently if you stopped believing in God? The minister thought for a minute and then said, sometimes I'm tempted by other women, but I don't cheat on my wife because of my love for Jesus, knowing how much it would hurt Jesus. That gave me an easy answer. I said, sometimes I'm tempted, but I don't cheat because of my love for Sharon, knowing how much it would hurt Sharon. I think even the minister's wife preferred my answer. Whether to base decision on the needs of an imaginary God or on real human beings is the essential difference between conservative religionists and humanists. I always look for common ground with religious people, even if it's difficult, as in the following case. Now, what could I possibly have in common with Jerry Falwell? Well, Jerry Falwell once said, God doesn't hear the prayers of a Jew. I agree with Jerry Falwell, though for very different reasons. Here's my website, herbsilverman.com, which contains some of my writings and debates, including my gubernatorial debate and the debate I just mentioned with the minister. It also has more information about my book, Candidate Without a Prayer, as well as about my other book, An Atheist Stranger in a Strange Religious Land, a compilation of some of my writings from the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Free Inquiry, Free Thought Today, and other publications. Since I'm a Jewish atheist, I'll close with a joke about one. A Jewish atheist learns that the best school in town happens to be Catholic, so he enrolls his son. Things are going well until one day the boy comes home and says, I just learned all about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The boy's father, barely able to control his rage, grabs his son by the shoulders and says, Joey, this is very important, so listen carefully. There is only one God, and we don't believe in him. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. All right. In a couple seconds, we are going to break out into our discussion groups, into the breakout groups. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to open up for anyone with questions or anyone who wants to mention an idea that your breakout room came up with. As always, keep your questions and comments brief so we can get to as many people as possible. We know everyone is muted right now, so if you have a question or comment, raise your hand or do a little reaction symbol, and we can unmute you. I think you may also have the ability to unmute yourselves as well. But I'm going to go ahead and get questions started. I'm the MC, I have that power.
Mike has one, I think.
Oh, Mike has one? All right. Well, all right, let's go ahead and get to Mike then.
Are you ready?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. We were wondering, since you live near the buckle of the Bible Belt, how crime data there compares with the nation.
What?
How criminal data there in the Bible Belt compares with the remainder of the nation.
I think usually there's a lot more violence in the South, which is the Bible Belt largely, than in the North. I think crime rates are a lot lower in the Northeast or in the Northwest. But I don't have statistics with me now.
I'll write a blog on that, maybe. You're way ahead.
All right. We've got a couple of questions about this. Could you elaborate a bit more on the term Jewish atheist? Is it possible to be Jewish and an atheist? And if so, could it also be possible to be a Christian atheist?
Well, I can't speak for Christian atheists, but I know for Jewish atheists, since you're an atheist, if your mother was Jewish, that means you could be a secular atheist or a secular Jew. No reason to believe in God. There are religious Jews. Those are the kind you would say believe in God, but it's not really just the religion. Now, for Christians, I've known Christians who consider themselves atheists, but they were born Christian, they come from a Christian family and don't want to hurt their family, but they're mostly concentrating on some of the good things about Christianity, like social justice, love your neighbor, and doing good works, and they call themselves Christian. I mean, I've often heard people say, when I did something good, that was a Christian thing to do. And I said, no, that was a humanist and an atheist thing to do. Because you don't have to be a Christian to be good, and we need to show that to other people as well.
Awesome. What would you suggest someone in another state like Texas that has a similar requirement to someone holding public office do?
Well, to challenge it, go to the ACLU or Americans United for Separation of Church and State, or maybe even the governor, to see if would want to enforce it. In my state, the governor did want to enforce it, so that's why we had a legal challenge. Some state constitutions are unenforceable, and the people there know it. So if they have it in Texas, first you should check and then see whether they would enforce it.
And we're getting some comments that there have been prominent atheists who have run for office.
Oh, there are atheists we know now there are about at least 27 atheists in Congress, but we found that through the Secular Coalition, but they won't come out of the closet. And there are other atheists who have run for Congress openly. Most of them have not won. We're hoping that will change.
I think that's the key point, is winning the race.
Well, it's also running for office, I think, is good, where people get to hear an atheist speak and say, hey, that guy seemed reasonable. He didn't have horns coming out of his head.
Exactly. This is a bit of more of an opinion. How would you define the Bible Belt? Some people would consider Texas part of the Bible Belt. Other people wouldn't. What is your opinion on the definition of the Bible Belt?
I don't think that there's a strict definition, but it's a state where it seems most people tend to more literally follow the Bible. Places like South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, I think of it mostly as the Southeast, mainly the old Confederacy. I would think of it the Bible Belt. And whether Texas is, I really don't have a strong opinion on it. but I know there are a lot of religious people there, more so than, say, in California or the state of Washington or Oregon out west.
Richard has a question.
So, yeah, Herb, that was an excellent talk. Thank you, and thank you for all the great stuff you're doing there. I was curious whether when people have heard about your actions in other states, if any of them have, I mean, states that have similar bans on secular people seeking public office, if you've heard of anybody else who has undertaken sort of what you did, sort of choosing a low-level office and then applying and then seeing what happened.
Well, I know there are such laws on state books, and people have asked about it, I think in Pennsylvania also, but then the state acknowledged that it's not enforceable. They wouldn't challenge it. So when that happens, it seems that it just goes away. I know at one point in Massachusetts, they had a law that you can't kiss your wife outside on Sunday. And of course, that wouldn't be enforceable. It just says something about what life was like during the Puritan era. And also, what I used in challenging it was in the notary case for me was Torcaso versus Maryland. That went to the Supreme Court, and that's where they ruled that notary publics are allowed to hold public office even if they're an atheist. And my state should have just acknowledged that and moved on, but they didn't, which gave me a forum that I enjoyed.
All right, any additional questions? Robert.
Yeah, how do you approach this with the obvious sense of joy and humor and opportunity, whereas some of us react with irritation and frustration with some of these things? I mean, you're a great model, Herb, for how to approach these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I actually enjoy myself being on the right side of an issue. So I try, when I hear ridiculous things said about me or about atheists, I don't take it personally. I just like to answer the questions. Of course, I feel this is all ridiculous, but I don't tell the other person that they're ridiculous. I just show why they're ridiculous. So I'm actually enjoying myself when I do it, and especially in debates where some ridiculous things are said by the other side. You know, I didn't say anything about my other book, An Atheist Stranger in a Strange Religious Land. If you like, I could read a short excerpt or two from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay, please.
Okay.
Good thumbs up.
Okay, here's where I make a case for a title I would really like. Pope Herb. Hear me out. The Catholic Church can look especially foolish when it makes up different rationalizations for its positions. For instance, it used to accept the wisdom of St. Bonaventure. Since only the male was made in the image of God, only the male can receive the godlike office of priest. After such claims became embarrassing, even to the church, the story became only males can hold positions of leadership because all the apostles were male. Since all the apostles were Jews, most of whom were married, I'm more qualified to be Pope than celibate Gentiles. My first act as Pope would be to declare ex cathedra, invoking papal infallibility, that all future popes must be atheists, turning Catholicism into an evidence-based religion. And now, let me just give one other item. Sometimes it's easier to make a point with one pithy sentence. So I have a chapter in the book on such sound bites, and here's a sample. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was aardvark. Faith-based knowledge is like regular knowledge, but without the knowledge. Humans are just fish plus time. Gods don't kill people. People with gods kill people. God is 100% malevolent, but only 70% effective, which explains our world today. Life is a sexually transmitted disease with 100% mortality rate. It's well known that 87.3% of statistics are made up. Finally, some folks waste a lot of time and energy trying to interpret difficult, anachronistic, and contradictory biblical passages. So I'll make it easy and sum up both the Old and New Testaments in 5 words each. Old Testament, obey the Lord or die. New Testament, believe in Jesus or fry. Okay. So that's a sample of my other book, Atheist Stranger in a Strange Religious Land.
Definitely
Thank
got
you.
some very
Yeah,
positive
good.
feedback there. All right. I think if no one else has any other questions, just kind of checking one last time. Oh, Richard, do you have another question? Oh, we got one more question. All right.
Herb, was your wife secular before she met you, or?
Yes, she was secular. She grew up Catholic, went to all Catholic high school and an all Catholic college, and hadn't known an atheist until later in adulthood. But a lot of what she was supposed to believe, she didn't. And I don't know, she might have considered herself an agnostic when I met her. And that's fine. There have been arguments about agnostic versus atheist, but there have never been any religious wars about that.
Fair point.
I would consider myself both an agnostic and an atheist. An atheist is just someone without a belief in any gods.
I think a lot of us probably are in a similar, would define ourselves similarly. But all right. I think a lot of people with positive things, a lot of people appreciating the conversation. So very glad to have you here today. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for showing up.
And I do hope some of you will check out secular.org and find out more about the Secular Coalition for America, which is doing really good things and what we need them.
Absolutely. You said secular.org.
Secular.org, yes.
The chat box for people to see. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for being here today. Herb. Before we have one final song from our band, Ilyemi, we're going to post the link to donate and sign up for our weekly newsletter in the chat window. While we're no longer meeting in a physical space, we are still paying the musicians and still have some fixed expenses. We still have big plans for the future. And so if you like what we're doing, please consider donating.